Okay, it is 1 o'clock and it is time for us to get started, and we are excited. First of all, I want to thank Tony Lamazares, and Tony, I hope I pronounced your name right, for today's opening quote. It's actually one of my favorites from the incomparable Maya Angelou, and your timing was absolutely great, Tony, because I thought Maya's words would be a great opening for this show, and it would be really difficult for me to choose just one from her many essays, poems, and words of wisdom. To our audience, you have been asking for this show, and we are thrilled to be able to bring this to you today. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are among the top initiatives we can embrace in Parks and Recreation. And we have had so many emails and survey responses and questions about getting an expert panel today. And Jody, my friend, you have certainly done that. We are so excited to bring this group of amazing women together to share insight and goals on creating equitable opportunities in parks and communities. We know you're going to have questions, so that is what the Q&A function is for. Please ask your questions there. We will try to get to as many as possible during the show and after our questions. We're also going to ask you to play an active role by answering our 3 poll questions today, so watch for those, and we look forward to hearing from you. So without further ado, Jody, take it away.
Oh my gosh, Anne-Marie. I have been waiting for this. I've been up early this morning, couldn't wait to get to this show. So let's get to our leaders and panelists. Tracey Crawford, Executive Director, Northwest Special Recreation Association, President of American Therapeutic Recreation Society, fellow member, American Academy of Parks and Recreation Administration, and chair for the JEDI Task Force. And also she has had numerous leadership roles in National Recreation Park Association, Illinois Park and Recreation Association, Illinois Park Foundation, as well, of course, as a chair or a branch president. She also has received numerous awards, as many of us know, but 2 notable. National Therapeutic Recreation Society, she received the Mentorist Service Award, and the National Institute on Recreation Inclusion Excellent in Inclusion Award. Tracey, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I mean, I feel like you're not talking about the right person. Like, who's that girl? She's tough. Thank you so much. I'm honored to be with my fellow colleagues. So thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Well, and Tracey, I'll just tell you, you've said a number 1. You're our first return guest, but you are the expert and we needed you to come back. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Dr. Autumn Saxon-Ross, Vice President of Education and Chief Equity Officer, National Recreation Park Association, Mid-Atlantic Regional Director, Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity, leader for National Bridge. That's where her past was. And then also she was Program Director for the Place-Based Initiative at National Coalition for Health Equity. Perfect. Physical Activity, Nutrition, and Obesity Specialist for DC Department of Health, Assistant Director for Health in Parks for Washington Parks and People. Welcome, Autumn, to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm so happy to be included in Leaders for Parks and Recreation, and so happy to be back officially in the field.
Need you, huge. Dr. Sonya Shaw, Senior Park Planner and Equity Specialist at McAdams Firm, Raleigh, North Carolina. Parks and Recreation professional with 30 years experience, serving as Parks and Recreation Director the last 15 years in the city of Goldsboro and town of Gardner, North Carolina. Sorry about that if I kind of butchered that, I apologize. Co-founder of North Carolina Black Recreation Park Professionals, former council member, Council on Accreditation of Recreation Parks, Tourism, and Related Fields, and former regent for the NRPA Supervisor Management School, President-elect of National Recreation and Park Ethnic Minority Society, and she's currently an adjunct faculty at North Carolina Central University, and she is a past adjunct professor at North Carolina State University. Okay, she is also a new member of the American Academy of Parks and Recreation Administration.
So
Congratulations.
excited.
Thank
Oh.
you, Jody. Thank you. Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here amongst these wonderful women on this panel. Thanks again for the invite. Looking forward to our discussion.
You betcha. And so let's go ahead and switch to good news, national news real quick. I want to shout out to Billings, Montana. They just opened, and this is where I live now. I went to an opening and they just opened their first park in 40 years here. I know, 40 years. Now they have done facility development. They have expanded trails immensely in this community with TrailNet, but my goodness, so many of us have been fortunate to be able to open that park within at least 5 to 10 years. It's been 40 years. Bill Cole led the charge with the Parks and Recreation Department of Mike Whitaker and Mark Jarvis and their community partners of Partners for Parks and Friends of Parks. I just want to shout out to you. Congratulations on this new park. It's got a brand new, unbelievable dog park in it. So I hope you will take that challenge to go ahead and go to billingsparks.org. Also, stay tuned. We are going to address this fall opening. I know that people are having challenges right now with the resurgence of the Delta virus, but stay tuned. Our next show, we're going to talk about some of that. We have 3 unbelievable panelists that Anne-Marie will share with you later, but we are super excited about addressing this and being right there, boots on the ground, helping you out on this fall. And then finally, I want to just call your attention to National Recreation Park Conference. The NRPA conference is right around the corner. It's September 21st through the 23rd. There's going to be even some other events around it. The bottom line is there is early bird registration. Do not miss this. You can go in person. You can go virtually, but you do not want to miss this conference. It is going to be tremendous. And I'm not just saying that as a past president. I'm just sharing with you, fellow colleagues, tune in, register, and get it done. And then finally, we are in July Parks and Recreation Month. And oh, wow, don't miss this opportunity. You still got over a week to go. And you have a great NRPA toolkit that's available to you at nrpa.org. So get on there and let's get this done, everyone. All right, panelists, here we go. Question number 1. I feel like I'm at some game show or something, you know? Oh my gosh. Well, listen, this is serious business, but this is really good news with you all. What has been your role in helping local park and recreation departments across the country meet and or exceed their goals in providing equitable opportunities across the board when it comes to facilities, programs, general services offered to their citizens? And we want to start off with you, Tracey.
Oh, I feel privileged. Listen, as I listen to your question, Jody, so many things come to mind. So first, I'm going to put on my rec therapy hat and talk about inclusion. That's where my heart is, those of you that know me, and especially during the pandemic, recreation therapists across the country were really working hard to advocate for individuals with disability so that they were not, during the time when we were all experiencing depression and so many other health issues with being shut in, but making sure that their voices were heard and that people understood that even though they had a disability, it did not mean that they could not receive services during COVID. I'm a proponent for accessibility for all. I believe that individuals have the right to choose who they want to recreate with, how they want to recreate, and where they want to recreate. And so it's my job. I work in Illinois. I serve 17 park districts. That's a part of my footprint. Before there, I've worked at 2 other special recreation associations. And here we not only work hard to educate individuals with disability about the access to services, but we work just as hard with our park districts to make sure that in the forefront of their thinking, anytime they're thinking of updating a facility space, a park, thinking of a program, I always want them to think about is this accessible? That's their first question. I want that to be in the forefront of their mind. So my team has been working diligently. I have a team of 4, I'm so proud, who are also nationally known, have written chapters and textbooks and all of those things. And we're constantly out training and educating about the rights of individuals with disability. So when we're talking about equity and diversity, I want you also to think about individuals with disability. The second part of that is going to be, I'm going to address more from my role as a past state association president. And as we were going through COVID, and I know myself watching on TV, because weren't we all captured? I mean, that's all we had for many months. But seeing the murder of George Floyd, I realized that I had to do something. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't quite sure where to begin. I got together with a bunch of other professionals and colleagues and said, I don't know if you're feeling the same way, but this is how I'm feeling. I'm feeling like I want to talk about this, and I want a place that's safe for me to talk about this. So I'm really proud, and I'll talk about later, I hope. I worked hard with our state association to create safe spaces for individuals as professionals to start talking about racism, LGBTQ plus, Latina, Latinx issues, and how it is affecting our programs, our services, and our communities. We have now done over 50 conversations. We have 3 different teams. We're working with NRPA and other state association affiliates. It's allowed us to create a dialogue, because I really think that not only, we always say it starts in the parks, it really does. We as professionals, we open the doors and we say that we're open to everyone. So I think it is important that we as professionals create an environment that allows for inclusivity in our actions, words, and in our deeds. So hopefully I answered your question, Jody, but that's kind of what I've been doing on a personal level.
Well, it's major. And again, Tracey, you've been the leader, and you've been that leader out there that has been unconditionally available. And thank you so much for that, because again, I know how busy you were and are. And so anyway, let's move on to Autumn. Thank you so much, Tracey.
Thank you.
Thanks. And it's always great to follow Tracey. She makes you just want to write down so many things about what should not be happening, what you're doing, all of that. So, returning to the field in a national way, I don't have the chops or the long-standing support and leading of the field as my distinguished colleagues here. And I also have the opportunity to really set a standard and push the field forward in this new position at NRPA. And so in that, over the past 9 months, it's funny, as soon as I got hired, people are emailing me, well, can I do this? And can you do this? And can you help in here? And I had to take a step back and be like, hey, people, don't expect anything from me for about 9 months, because I have to kind of figure out where we are as a field. That is my job. That is my role. And so in that, I've really been spending a lot of time surveying the field formally and informally. And so was officially able to launch a few surveys for both state affiliates and agency directors, and got that report out on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the field. And then also have been able to do kind of this slow roll of unofficial surveying, talking to folks, developing relationships. I'm from Kansas City, Missouri, if you can't see my wonderful Kansas City Chiefs flag back there. And so when I went home for the 4th, got a chance to visit with 4 different agencies in Kansas and Missouri. So doing this slow opportunity to talk to folks in the field as I travel around local agencies here. And so bringing all that together, my role and my dream and my wish and what will become actualized over the next few years is this creating a standard, right? So we have standards across the across our field with COPART, with CAPRA, with CPRP. And this is what we're looking to do as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so thinking about competencies, being able to define equity. When we talk about centering equity, it's very important we have a common language. So making sure people know what we're leading with, that it's about us changing as well as doing things for the field. And then also creating a framework. And it's so great to have Tracey here. And so in that definition of diversity, equity, inclusion, remembering that inclusion means different abilities, right? Whether it is physical, whether it is mental abilities, whether it's bearing positions when it comes to, normative behavior, all of that. And so it's not just about race. Race is important, and in our PA, we are leading with that, but it's about all of these different categories that our society either puts value on or does not. And so that's very important that we start that. And so just lastly, the competencies, I've been reiterating this over and over. It's important for folks to not think of diversity, equity, inclusion as something extra. It is the work of being a good person. So when we talk about the competencies that we're putting forward, one competency is, it's four that you're going to see over and over. The first is direct communication. Because if I can't talk to my someone that I supervise about being late every day, how am I going to talk to them about race? How am I going to help them be able to have good customer service with someone that comes in that speaks a different language? The second competency is self-awareness. Right? We know people with emotional intelligence and that are self-aware are able to walk in a room and recognize the power and the privilege they come depending upon who they are, where they are, how they speak, what language they speak, right? That's again, a competency of being a good person and treating folks and empathy. So self-awareness. The third is creating relationships across difference. If we really want to have difficult conversations, if we want to support folks, whether community folks or folks within agencies, and having difficult conversations and feeling comfortable in uncomfortable situations, you have to make relationships. You have to have that relationship with someone and be like, this is going to come out maybe horribly, but I would like to have this conversation. How can I help? How can you help me? And then last but not least is a racial equity lens, to recognize that systems in this country and probably arguably in the world is based on race. And the more that we can understand that, the more that we can use data to track it, right? And have that analysis, the better we are at ensuring equity, not equality, but making sure that we give people what they need to go. So those are the competencies that we will be working with. We're also going to be developing a common language, and I'll wait till later to give up the mic for Dr. Shaw real quick, but also a framework. So it's a framework that basically recognizes that organizations are people. And if we want organizations and policies to change, we actually have to invest in people to become good people so that then they can actually apply those good competencies and skills in everything they do, regardless if it's at work or at home.
Autumn, oh my gosh, I'm hanging on every word. This is what we have needed. NRPA has worked very hard over the years to work together and do everything we can in the field to be very global, very open. But really, Autumn, you're putting the metal to the pedal. And I've talked to Christine quite a bit about this. This is so great. You just shared those competencies with us because we know we have a direction. Thank you so much for sharing that. Gosh, I was hoping you'd do that. Way to go. Okay, Sonya, bring us home on this one.
Sure thing, I will. So I think Dr. Ross gave me a great introduction to talk about the people that we have in positions that are making decisions regarding equity and what it looks like for communities. So I'm going to lean, as an administrator, I'm going to lean in the direction of staffing and advisory boards and committees, because these are two areas I certainly love to work alongside, be a part of. But when you're thinking about parks as an administrator, you really want to focus on that organizational culture and how is it that we can transition staffing and advisory boards that don't reflect the demographics of the community. That's a heavy lift, but it's certainly a requirement that we all need to make when we're thinking about how is it that staffing can make great decisions regarding equity. How do we build it into our programs if we're not training and developing and providing professional professional development opportunities for our staff to be a part of that. So for me as an administrator, my focus the last few years has been on providing opportunities, one, at the staffing level to be a part of DEI trainings, be a part of the dialogue around what's happening across the state and country regarding programming levels, and how is it that we do outreach to communities of color. I think that's very, very important. But of course, that begins with leadership. Every decision that we make regarding equity has to start at the leadership level, which means we've got to allow staff to be able to communicate, what does equity look like in my programs, in my services? And a lot of that, again, comes from, one, recruiting staff that reflects the demographics of the community. Oftentimes we have agencies that don't look like the communities that we're serving. So yes, one of my true loves has been diversifying the staff. My last role, I was the only African-American on staff full time. So you can imagine what trying to create equity looked like in that space. But, at that time, we certainly had some supportive staff in place and administrators to support and make that happen. The same thing occurred with advisory boards and committees. Talking with the council and mayor and saying, hey, I'd like to be a part of the decision-making process when it comes to who's coming on the boards, who's coming on our committees, because we want to make sure that we are having individuals on those committees who are representative of the community, not just in demographics, but in interests as well. So those were kind of my areas where I love to hang out with regarding equity and what the role has been and how it's been important. And I'll talk about affinity groups a little later. So we'll have time for that.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Shaw, I just want you to know we've been tracking you for several months. And when you left your last post as director, we tracked you down, and your best friend, Rosalind Johnson, who has been on this show, tracked you down. So thank you for joining us. But I'm so glad you talked about the staffing. It takes courage.
Yes.
And you're talking about courage. And you're talking about, that's the key to leadership today, is taking those steps, but being courage, taking that courage on hand. And boy, it's tough sometimes when you're in that leadership role, because you're not always most popular. But you know what? It's not a popularity contest.
Exactly.
So, all right, Anne-Marie, we're back to you with our first poll question.
All right, let's do it. So as always, we want to know what's going on with you guys out in our studio audience. So we're going to ask you a question where you are in your goals to provide equitable parks. So let's take a look at that. Panelists, you can vote as well if you would like. So what we'd like to know for the first question is, in our goals to provide equitable parks, we are currently, this is a multiple choice, you can choose all that apply, have hired or are seeking an equity manager director, are exploring ways to open new or expand existing parks in underserved communities, have data to show the demographic makeup of our park users to understand where changes are needed. This is certainly an important step. Offer free or low-cost programming so that income is not a barrier to participation. Ensure that equity is at the center of new and existing initiatives. Engage local residents in the process of developing or programming parks and green spaces. Offer transportation to parks for people with no means of transportation, or something else. And we always like to put that in there. We can never think of all the answers to this. There's actually a limit to the number of answers we can put in Zoom. So if there's something else that you're doing, please check that box and share that with us in the Q&A so we can share that with the team. And so a lot of passionate voting going on here. The numbers are still jumping. I'm just going to answer a quick question from our audience. Somebody asked if the audience is muted. Unfortunately, yes, with hundreds of folks logging on for the calls, there's just no way that we can have live Q&A with everybody's voices. We apologize for that. We would certainly love to do that, but it's just not possible with so many people in the audience. So that Q&A box is your voice. Please use it to ask questions, make comments, share those all during call. And it's very important to us to hear what your thoughts are on any of our shows that we're talking about. So please use that Q&A. All right, it looks like the voting is slowing down. So we're going to give you about 5 more seconds here before we stop it. 3, 2, 1, let's end the poll. And we're going to share those results. I love this. Look at that. We've got actually a pretty close tie with offering free or low cost programming. So income is not a barrier. That is fantastic. And then really great to see engaging local residents in the process of developing or programming parks and green spaces. You know, it is never up to us to decide what a community needs. And all communities are so different with such a different makeup. And so it is really exciting to see that folks are engaging those local residents, because obviously if we don't listen to them, those parks are probably not going to be used as much as they possibly could. So that is fabulous to see. And again, a few people picked something else. Please share what other things you're doing so we can share that with our audience at large. And that's great. So Jody, I'm going to turn it back to you. We'll do a couple more polls here in just a minute.
Well, you know, that one question is so important that you just asked, but you know what's key too? I was interested to see that there were some people offering transportation. When we've surveyed for years and years in our field, transportation has come to the forefront, number one, on accessibility and getting to programs, and especially in youth. Especially, I remember this as a director. That was our biggest challenge. So again, thank you all for participating in that. It really helps us guide the relevance right now and where we're at right now in the country. Okay, question number 2. Well, this is wave the magic wand. Describe what an ideal equity model for a park system would be. What does that ideal park system equity model look like in your opinion? Autumn, start us off, please.
Yeah, so I'm going to say that the ideal system is something that we are building to push out to the membership in the field at NRPA. And so if you get a chance, please definitely look at the Equity in Parks report that we put out in May. And so for me, it's really built on this framework. So I love always challenging people to do both and. I'm not an either or lady, girl, mom. It's always both and. You can be my daughter's favorite thing now is, Mama, I'm mad at you, but I still love you, right? Like this both and. You can be mad and you can still love, right? And so for me, equity model is really this idea of we have to focus and invest in people, right? And places and systems, right? Because we all know that one good policy, but because we didn't train people on how to use it, the policy is worthless, right? Or that really great program that we invested in people that left, and because we didn't systematize it or put policies in place, it disappeared. And so the framework that we're putting forward to really guide all of our work is based on that both and. We have to invest in people through professional development, through learning opportunities, through practice opportunities, and we have to focus on changing policies, changing systems, changing organizations. And so for me, it's always this idea that an organization at its bare minimum is people. And if we want organizations and policies and a field to change, right, knowing that we are at the intersection of all of the wonderful and challenging changes of our country, right? That's where we sit as Parks and Recreation. We have to step back and recognize we have to invest in our professionals. So for us, it's really this idea of this individual. So there's 4 quadrants. And so on one side, it's this individual. And so it's the individual internal. So when I talked about self-awareness, how do we help people become more aware? How do we up people's social and emotional intelligence? How do we help folks practice empathy, practice communication? All of these things, again, being good people, right, helps us be better park and recreation professionals. And so the second piece is the individual external, which is really the developing relationships. So how do I be a good ally? How do I step up for folks, whether in the community or within my agency, and make sure that blind spots are not being, that I have a respectful and a loving way to talk about blind spots and to have those conversations to make sure that we as people are really moving forward together. And then on the external side in the framework is that org culture that Dr. Shaw talked about. So it's that, how do we take these my awarenesses together, I'm developing these relationships, then what is that culture? Because we all know what's the phrase, that culture eats strategy. And if we don't have a supportive culture, so that when I come in and say we have to have new hiring practices, or we have to do a better job serving our community, XXX, right? We have a culture where people can wrestle and talk about those things. and we can come up and some of my old colleagues like to call it falling forward, right? Knowing that we're going to be messy and it may have worked here and oh, we got to come back and go through there, but that all org culture that really helps us all fall forward together and accept that everything's not going to be perfect and everything's not going to work all the time. Right. And so taking those lessons learned and reorganizing and shifting. And then the last piece of that external is the organizational external. So what are all the things that we are doing with the outside world so they know we have our stuff together? So now we have people that are self-aware. Now we have good relationships. Now we have a good org culture. What does that mean when someone's looking at our Parks and Recreation magazine? What does that mean when people see the language in our website? What does that mean when people are coming in our building that speak a different language and see that there are folks that are really trying to help them versus making them feel even more isolated? And so for me, that's a perfect model, is that, again, we recognize that this field is people. And the more that we do a both and approach of investing in people, right? Because it's a muscle. When, you know, like I like to use the example of when my children learn to walk, right? They built that muscle. My whole life changed. I got to think about stairs. I got to think about what it is to reach. I have to, and that's the same. So I like to talk about diversity, equity, inclusion as a muscle. If we build it right in people, guess what? Everybody's world is changing. The way they're talking to people, the way they're talking to each other, the way they're opening up, the way they're doing everything. So that's a perfect equity model for me.
That is amazing. And you know, one aspect that I think we as professionals are pretty hard on ourselves, but you kept mentioning practice. And you know, we all know that from our youth. Practice is what we need to do when you implement something and you learn a skill or you learn some type of method of doing something. You have to practice it. We're not going to be perfect, but we do expect that perfection out of us. And that's too bad, because sometimes that hurts us just as much as it helps us. But practice, we can keep teaching, learning, training, but we've got to keep practicing.
Right. And
thank you, Autumn.
Culture, yeah, like so, like with my kids, right? Like they fall.
Yeah.
What do? They're not going to stop walking because.
That's right.
But we as parents create that culture so that they feel comfortable getting up and trying again and fall down. And that, I mean, and that is so, and we, as Parks and Recreation professionals, we love supporting people, but we don't support ourselves in that messiness, in that practice, in that not being perfect. So that's what I'm about.
Oh, I love it. Sonya, please chime in.
Absolutely. So I'm going to try and contain my excitement because we are really doing an awesome work at McAdams. And at McAdams, they have carved out a space for little old Sonya to come in and do some equity work to help communities really communicate what equity looks like and how do you measure it and why is it important in your park system. So we have started building this framework and we're looking at factors that impact the equity in parks. A couple of those are the geographic distribution of parks. We're looking and using GIS mapping systems, figuring out where parks are located in communities, where are parks missing, what are the demographics of those areas, and why is it that we need to look and consider the proximity of those parks and to certain neighborhoods, and how many neighborhoods are located within a 10-minute walk of parks. So we began thinking about that and we're able to compare that data and have information to help departments move forward. Tracey, you'll love, we're looking at accessibility too. Yes, we are. Transportation being a part of that, you know, how are people accessing the parks, not just what happens when they're in the park, but can they even get there? Can you get to your playground? Mm-hmm. You know, what does that look like for us? What trail surfaces that do you have that either help or hinder people from moving forward? Mm-hmm. And the equipment itself for people with disabilities, yes, we're looking at that. And then we do more of the boots on the ground with the accessibility piece, the quality, the physical condition of parks, and the safety. You know, what's happening around park safety with your play equipment, the lighting in parks, something as simple as lighting that provides safety in parks. And then when we think about the financial investment piece, That's the largest piece that when you're considering equity and what it looks like for parks, that financial investment piece is certainly very important because it begins identifying, one, how is funding even prioritized in your system? So once you figure out prioritization of your funding mechanisms, then how is it distributed? And are you tracking that? So that when we go and look at the quality or the physical conditions of parks, are those parks that are been in neighborhoods for 20, 30 plus years? What does the maintenance level look like at those parks versus the 10 and $20 million parks that were just built a couple of years ago? So I am beyond excited that we get an opportunity to do this in multiple communities across the Southeast region and to be able to build that body of knowledge so that we as a profession can use this to communicate what our true needs are when we're trying to think about equity and what it really looks like in our park system.
You know, golly, Sonya, when you took your job, we wanted you to stay as a practitioner, but you know what? We needed you to go to the industry because really the practitioner in the industry is so important. You've lived it. You've made it. You've been in the trenches.
Yes.
So again, thank you for going to the private industry. We need that guidance so much. Tracey, wow, do we have our hands full?
Listen, I'm going to just ditto what was said there, but thinking about this question, I was looking at, we're all on social media, and there was a statement, some quotes by Dr. Monica Cox. And here's what I want you to, and it really drove some things home for me. It said, instead of showing me your diversity statement, okay, because we started talking about DEI, and I know you both have dealt with this. Everybody's like, we need a statement. We need a statement. Okay.
No
so
kidding.
I'm not saying that you shouldn't have a statement, please. But listen to this next part. Instead of showing me your diversity statement, show me your hiring data, okay? Your discrimination claim stats, your salary tables. Let me just repeat that one again. Your salary tables, okay? Your retention numbers, your diversity policies, your leaders' public actions against racism, and I'm going to add, in all forms of discrimination, all those isms.
Yeah. Yes.
So, I think so often we are so used to that very strategic checklist, task, action item format. And what my colleagues are talking about is sustainable processes, creating a memory that it's ongoing. And so I just really want everybody to think, when you're talking about what does that look like? What does that perfect system look like? It means understanding that diversity, equity, inclusion is a process. It's ongoing. It's not a checklist that you can just say, woo, statement, done. I'm done. Or better yet, I've hired that one minority person or that one, whatever it is. Don't you see them? And then I'm done. It's really always at the forefront. You're always thinking, challenging. I love that part about diversity policies. And I think really, people think that that's so difficult, but I always challenge them to say, when you're looking at a policy, ask yourself, who does the policy include and who does the policy exclude? Start there. Not saying that everyone excluded isn't who you want to be excluded, criminals, However, when you ask those simple questions, it opens you up to a broader conversation. And I think all of us support that conversation with your team. Who are we really identifying in this policy? Who benefits from this policy? And who may be excluded because of their race, religion, cult, whatever it may be. So that's kind of, to me, it's really moving away from that concept of it being a one and done, something that has a timeline, and just being integrated into your everyday practices, processes, thinking. I loved what Dr. Saxon said, where it's part of your memory, your muscle memory. It just, wouldn't we love 10 years from now, it's just a part of what we do. I'm saying 10 years.
Absolutely.
Okay, I giggle when I say
Absolutely.
that, but I'm being optimistic. So that's kind of how I want to frame that. Again, that was Dr. Monica Cox. Just look her up. I'm just so interested in all of her stuff, but that just really in a concise list really brought to the forefront what we should be thinking about.
You know, colleagues, we just had a 16-week course in training and education within 15 minutes. That was amazing, you all. Thank you for really concise, direct information with guts behind it and excellent, excellent. Golly, we needed that response. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to you, Anne-Marie. We have 2 more poll questions ahead.
We do, and I don't even know how I follow that up, because
I know. I mean,
that
I'm
was
just like blown
utterly
away.
incredible. You know, it's so funny. I was reading something the other day, and I thought this was really insightful too, that said equity is not a marketing campaign. Like, look at your company, and if it's your marketing department that's handling it, you are totally off mark. And you know, it's not. It's to your point. It's not a statement. It's everything. It's everything. It's the culture, it's the lifestyle, it's everything. So that was just so insightful. For our next poll question, we want to ask you guys in the audience, and again, panelists, you can vote as well, a specific question about inclusion and promoting usage for people with disabilities. And you know, I always like to say that providing this kind of service is very much like an electrical conduit, right? So you can have a piece working here, and you can have a piece working here, and a piece over here. But if it is not joined together with everything connected, it's not going to work, right? So it's not just thinking about having an accessible this or an accessible that. It's everything. So what we'd like to ask is, what are you guys doing right now to promote usage for people with disabilities? Programs that are accessible to people of all abilities, fully accessible site amenities, fully accessible playgrounds, fully accessible trails and pathways, signage in parks that includes Braille or cues for people with disabilities, community meetings to help direct our efforts on unmet inclusion needs. Surprisingly, there are a lot out there. You know, people tend to think about, you know, people who use wheelchairs. There are a lot of different types of disabilities that don't include a wheelchair. So how are you addressing all of those and, you know, communicating with your community members? A website that follows the web content accessibility guidelines. I would be really interested to see, I think everybody would, kind of how that poll question shakes out, because, you know, if you think about just something as simple as putting alt tags on your website, I can't tell you the number of websites that I go to that don't have that, so that maybe people who can't see the pictures have a way of understanding what the pictures are. You know, font size, font depth, contrast for people with contrast sensitivity. You know, are you using yellow text on white or gray backgrounds? I gotta tell you right now, that's not working. It's just not working.
Right.
So thinking about that whole web content accessibility guideline and how you're following that, or again, something else. And if it is something else, please let us know. We do want to know what that is. Seeing a lot of voting going on. We're going to give just 1 or 2 more seconds here. So if you have some more answers, please let us know. And we're going to end this one in 3, 2, 1. And let's share the results. Programs, look at that. 93% of the folks who answered are, you know, programs that are accessible to people of all abilities. That is fantastic. Site amenities, playgrounds, pathways, you know, a good mix there. We know there's a lot of other types of infrastructure that are in parks, but just thinking about that connectivity, signage, community meetings. 33% of you said yes on the website, so that's good to see as well. And again, a few people said something else. We'd love to hear what those are. If you'd like to share them with us, please do that. So we're going to go to one more poll question here before we take it back to Jody for another question for our group, and that is, we want to know what your biggest challenges are to expanding DEI at your parks. Is it insufficient funding, inadequate staffing, facility space shortages, insufficient community outreach or understanding, a lack of support, a lack of staff training, having a formal policy and plan in place to follow? We aren't experiencing any challenges. Love to see a lot of voting for that. Or again, something else. So again, this is multiple choice. You can choose as many as you think are adequate. And boy, the polls are moving around. Everybody's voting on this. So that is really good to see. And I know, again, there's probably a lot of other things out there. It is so difficult with Zoom. We can only put in so many answers. So, if there's other things that you find are challenging you, please let us know that. We want to be able to communicate that with our group here, because we're all here to learn. So that's very important. And we're going to give you guys just a couple more seconds here. So please, if you have some more votes or answers that you want to share with us, please do. And let's end the poll and share the results with everybody. Kind of across the board on this one, funding seems to be right up there, in staffing. That's always a challenge no matter what we're trying to do, obviously. Interestingly, very few people, but a few have said they aren't experiencing challenges. So please share with us how that is going on. We would love to know what your policies are so that this is not a challenge for you, because that is amazing. That is absolutely amazing. So please share your best practices so we can share those with everybody. And thanks to everybody. Again, we always take these ideas and answers from polls and post-show surveys to come up with new ideas for shows. So these are very, very important to us. So thank you so much. And we're going to turn it back to you, Jody.
Can you believe that poll question? And what was number one? We promise you we didn't put anybody in the audience to set this up. But here's our third question. What financial backing is out there to support this extremely important work towards creating an equitable and inclusive park system throughout a community setting? Sonya, start us off.
Yes, I think the poll said it all. The funding is lacking in this area, and you've got to be really creative about how you approach securing funding for equity work. And I think you've got to carve out what area you're going to identify first, be it on the professional staff development or training versus backlog maintenance projects that need to get done. I think those are two totally different worlds to identify. So I'm gonna brag a little bit about North Carolina and what's happening in North Carolina around equity funding through Blue Cross Blue Shield North Carolina. So our state Parks and Rec Association, which is North Carolina Recreation and Park, the best one in the US, but I'll talk about that later. Bragging rights. But what our state association was able to do through one of our former staff members, he was able to secure funding through Blue Cross and Blue Shield for us as an organization, an association, to begin thinking about how we approach equity and what does equity look like at the association level. Not only did we do that, and once we started identifying what some of our strengths and weaknesses were, the funding also extended to our membership. So we were able to provide equity training for hundreds of professionals across the state. And they were able to go to these sessions and learn about why inequities exist in the first place. I mean, it took us all the way back to the 1500s, and just a huge education process brought us through Jim Crow, redlining. I mean, just talked about everything. So now people at least have an understanding perspective about, why do these inequities exist? But we were able to get that funding through a grant, Blue Cross Blue Shield, as we said. And again, it allowed us to do staff training and development. It allowed us as an organization to look at what equity looks like for us and be able to provide that resource to our practitioners across the state. So we were fortunate in that arena, but that doesn't exist everywhere. And when we're talking about funding, I mean, yes, that's at the professional development level, but I think there's a totally different conversation to be had about how funding decisions are made and where those funds exist for organizations that are wanting to do equity around park development and getting their parks up to standard. So I'm going to pass that on because I'm not sure if Tracey or Autumn were going to discuss that either. You muted, Jody.
Thank you. We're muted. You know, your state has been a leader for years, and we wanted you to address that because you all have done some dynamic work to be a leader. So other states, other leaders that are the leaders in your state associations, get with Dr. Shaw, but get with North Carolina. Please reach out to them. They're there for you, but they have been the leader. Tracey, please join in.
Wow, that is such a tough question. And again, I'm going to put my rec therapy hat on. We all faced, when the Americans with Disability Act came into place, it was an unfunded mandate. And so states were left with, how do we fund accessibility? Here in Illinois, we were able to levy separate from our property tax dollars and levy, which is called the Handicapped Accessible Fund. Hate that word, handicapped. Working to change that, but here we go. And so literally those dollars are able to be levied by our park and recreation agencies, cities, villages. Here's the key: who are a part of a special rec association. Okay, so there's the profit piece there, to fund programming, services, as well as accessibility and projects. And so that helped to get the shift the conversation, because we were getting stuck in, we want to do these things, but how do we pay for it? Is really what we were finding. And we just had to find some way to move around that. So I was blessed to be a part of the group of directors and legislators, park districts, as well as special rec associations that really pushed that forward. So that's kind of how we're addressing individuals with disability. On our state level, I want to talk about the professional, because you know that's where my passion is. And one of the things, again, being active in our state association and then being a part of our foundation for our state. Oftentimes what you find is, I'm a big proponent, if I don't see it, then it's not happening. Okay, so I want it in the strategic plan, I want to see the words, and I want to see the line item in the budget. And they kept getting tired of hearing me say, where is this budgeted? Oh, it's in with a professional development. No. See, because I've got my rec therapy hat on, and I remember when it used to say, well, services for individuals with disability was in with the rest. And we know what happens when time gets stressful. What's the first thing you eliminate? Okay, well, they already get services this way. And so fought and decided I'd put my money where my mouth is. And when I got on the foundation board, one of the things that we fought for is, we have a diversity task force, which I'll talk about later, but any training or opportunities that we do, safe zones, anything, we don't ask for any payment ourselves. And there's a group of almost 20 of us that funds go to our foundation for our state association to continue membership education in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it is a line item. And I see that dollar amount. And because we see it, then that keeps it in the forefront of people's minds, right? And it's built in. I'm trying to create that muscle memory, that it's built in so that people can no longer use financial inequities or lack of, or whatever it may be, as a barrier to preventing them from moving forward with their DEI efforts. So I'll also end with saying, I know that there are community foundations and grantors out there that do specifically focus on agencies that are moving forward with DEI efforts. So for agencies that are struggling and just need that seed funding to get started, I would seriously Google the Association for Fundraising Professionals is a great resource. And as far as finding foundations, community foundations, organizations that are giving dollars toward these efforts. So that's my piece and my input toward that financial.
Well, thank you, Tracy. And this is perfect setup for Autumn. And Autumn, we're never going to forget this. We're building a muscle, and we're never going to forget that statement. I'm now going to adopt that. I love that analogy, obviously, as a past or current still athlete. I can just tell you, that was a great analogy to give us all. Bring us home on this. You are the perfect one to finish this one up.
Well, that's a lot of pressure, and I hope that it lives up to
Oh,
the
it will.
expectations you're dropping on me. So I struggle with this a bit. I know one of the first when I was interviewing for this position, and if you pay attention to positions that are focusing on diversity, equity, inclusion, one of the biggest barriers for people to want to apply is that you get hired and then you don't have support from the CEO and you don't have a budget. So those are the first questions I ask. What's the budget? That lets me know that you give me autonomy and power. And who do I report to? Because again, that shows autonomy and power. And so I struggle between the idea of a muscle and if we support people in doing that, and the idea that it has to be funded. And so just to let you all know, I constantly kind of go back and forth because, I'll be honest, the Black woman in me is, it needs to get done, money or not. This is something that has to happen because
Right.
we cannot continue to kind of spin in this, well, we don't have the money, but it needs to get done. We don't have the money. So I'm just going to let you all know that that's the both and feelings that I sit in when this question comes to me. And so the poll that you took is very much in line with the survey results that we had come back to us in the report, right? This idea of funding, we're having problems with staffing and, we need funding, we need staffing, we need training. And so we're really taking that in at NRPA because that should and is a benefit of being a member. And so with our capacity that we're building, with funding that we can get from national organizations, I'm happy to, officially announce here first that we got funding, multi-year funding from the Pisces Foundation to fund our diversity, equity, and inclusion and work for the field because they want to support backbone organizations so that we can come to this tipping point. When we start to, because folks don't have funding, use our funding to do training, to do staff development, to do all those, we will now have that muscle memory across the field. And that is our role at NRPA, and that is what we are looking to do. So a bit of that is, again, you'll start to see this idea of recognizing, right? And we can advocate and help folks increase tax bonds. We can advocate and help for folks to go after grants. One thing that we can do that we know is important is to provide professional development and staff training for folks to get that muscle memory to do something while we're trying to figure out more funds, while we're advocating for folks with tax bonds, while we're helping people get funding for their state association or for their agency. But what I would recommend for folks that are sitting in this kind of mix of, oh, we can't do it without the money and we need the money and we can't do it, is to be intentional. And I heard Dr. Shaw and I heard Tracy, pick one thing to be intentional about and do that, because there are so many things that we could be doing. I really push you to pick one thing. And if we think about those competencies I talk about, a racial equity lens, use the data that you have to take the money that you have to help the folks that need it most, right? So we all have capital improvement budgets. And Jai Cole at Montgomery County Parks and Recreation does a great job of this, is thinking about, we have capital improvement money. What we don't have is the data to say that it should go here or it should go there. And that is what we have to start to do. So I will continue, of course, like Tracy said, to advocate for line items because those are important. But I'm also going to advocate and push and prod you all to think about intentionality and how do you use data to take the money you have and redirect it to push forward equity goals.
Perfect explanation. Perfect connect the dots. Thank you. Oh, wow. Anne-Marie, I'm going to lead you into the next segment because we got some special recognition here. But thank you all for those responses.
We do. This is really exciting. So you guys remember the segment that we do all the time about letting everybody recognize somebody on their team. With our team today, we know they've seen some great examples out there in the field of DEI leadership. So we've asked them all to highlight a department or community that they see as doing a great job. So that's what we're going to do this time. And we're going to start off with you, Autumn. Can you tell us about Kansas City Parks? And you're muted.
Yep. I was coming off mute. I always have children running in and you don't want to hear. Like I said, I'm from Kansas City and that's Missouri, not Kansas. And I got an opportunity to visit with the interim park director, Roosevelt, who has been with the department for 8 years. He was the deputy director and has stepped in to that role with the retirement of the former director. And what I love to learn, and so if you all got to read my article in NRPA's magazine this month, you'll know that Kansas City Parks really fostered my love of parks, recreation, outdoors, and is a wonderful example of how we are at the intersection. It was parks, pools were really on the forefront of integration in this country. It was the foundation to start Brown versus Board of Education. So there, I got to talk to Roosevelt and what they did. So this is a perfect example of using data to redirect public funds for equity, because equity is not giving everyone the same thing. That's equality. Equity is giving people what they need. And that's very hard for us in a country that believes in everything going equal. Well, if we know that people aren't starting at the same place, giving people the same thing continues to perpetuate some being in the front and some being in the back. And so the way that they've used their data, they've been working with the health department in Kansas City and also with University of Missouri, Kansas City, to create a new park district. So over the past 2 years, they used the health department's data and saw that there are 6 zip codes who have a discrepancy of 12 to 15 years of life expectancy. And this was one of the zip codes that I grew up in. So 64130 is one of those six zip codes. They've used the health department's data. They recognize that these policies and practices of exclusion have kept those six zip codes out of the running, right? All out of the running so that people are living 15 years less than the other zip codes within Kansas City, Missouri. And so what did they decide to do? They decided to create a 4th park district. So all of the parks within those 6 zip codes are now their own park district. They were highlighted in the Urban Land Institute's report that just came out a month ago about really great practices in equity. They created an additional park district, transferred a lot of their best, like maintenance, facility, programming folks to this park district to start to look at that history of inequity in funding, right? And so they've created this new park district because meeting people where they are and recognizing some people need more in that district of those zip codes. And then they're partnering with the University of Missouri, Kansas City and their neighborhoods commission to then create capacity within those zip codes to better understand how to advocate for their places. So UMKC is now doing workshops with community groups and community members on what are the processes to make sure lights are getting fixed. What are the processes between the city and the parks to make sure that the funding for the parks go to this park district? Because we all know there are certain communities that know those processes. They know who to call, where to call, how to put in money, how to put in a work order, how to do those things. And so I just love this this is a perfect example of using data to take money that exists to provide it equitably, to give it to folks that need it in different ways. That does not mean that the west side of Kansas City is not getting funding. It means that they are building the muscle and the capacity on folks on the east side of the city to get their due, to better understand how to make sure their lights work, their grass is getting cut, right? All of the things, their baseball fields are getting fixed. And so I'm just so excited to know that the place that I grew up is doing what they need to do to make sure that our park and recreation system is equitable.
Wow. What an amazing example. I mean, and what a lesson for everybody. Seriously, this is such a great show. You know, we always have these shows available to watch on demand afterwards. I'm going to be watching this one again and again. There is just so much. I can't even, you guys see me keep looking down. I keep writing stuff down. It's just so awesome. I am just blown away. Tracey, tell us about Illinois.
Oh, I'm so excited, y'all. I'm so excited. Let me talk about, everybody has your state association agency, and I am just so pleased to get the opportunity to really highlight my state association, where I've spent my 30-year career, and I would say all 30 years, or at least 20 years of it, has been actively involved in our state association. So let me tell you why. What I really want to talk about is the growth that I have seen as they have grown, again, that process to embrace diversity, equity, inclusion. And we are not perfect. We stumbled. I can't tell you how many times they would call me and say, Tracey, be a part of this task force. And we'd get together and then nothing would happen. Or, you know, things would change or whatever. And so let me just tell you the story of our state association. When I was on the board, you know, we all had different sections, you know, your rec section, your therapeutic recreation section. And we had, wasn't a section, but it was our ethnic minority section, which really wasn't an official section. Well, you know me, I didn't understand that. I could not understand how come the ethnic minority section did not have a place at the table, where at the time, the way our board was set up is each section rep was at the table. And I thought, well, how do you get to make decisions when you're not at the table? And so I worked with many other professionals at the time. Liz Kessler, who I think many of you know, was the president. She's a past president of NRPA, but she was the president of IPRA. And I was on that board, and I went to her with what I really thought was a dilemma. I said, you know, how are we going to talk about diversity and all of this when we're not even at the table? This section is like the bald-headed stepchild over here. Okay, why can't we get at the table? And so the first thing we did in 2008, maybe a little earlier, I'm dating myself, but IPRA as a board and leadership voted to make our ethnic minority section an official part of the board. Okay, so that was step one, which I was so pleased about. Then we worked really hard with the other sections, and we decided as a state to change the name. And it is the diversity section as it exists today. The next step, Debbie Trueblood, who was our board, or was our executive director, and just an incredible, innovative thinker, gave me that call in 2019 and said, Tracey, I think we need to address what had come up in our strategic plan, addressing what? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. And she said, I want us to really put together some action steps and a process to doing this. So she put together a task force. And in 2019, right before the COVID pandemic hit, we started the diversity task force of leadership. And that task force at the time was really focusing on how to diversify our profession and to get more diversity in our leadership and in different roles. Then, like I said, the pandemic hit, and we were all struggling with how to address some very large social issues, and the creation of our safe zones came to be. We now have 3 teams that represent LGBTQ+. Now, let me preface this. These are all professionals who volunteer their time to talk and share their stories with other professionals as they start down the path of investigating what do we need to do in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion where we live, where we work. Does that make sense? So what started as simple conversations have become a way for professionals to support other professionals when addressing this in their community, not only with their staff, other community leaders, but their boards. So I'm so proud of that. We've done, like I've mentioned, since 2020, June of 2020, over 50 different safe zone conversations
Wow.
in Illinois. I mean, we have raised over $11,000 that is earmarked, again, all of us volunteering. They don't pay us, they contribute. We don't give them an amount. It's just whatever your agency can afford to support continuing education and opportunities, webinars, you name it, in the area of diversity, equity, inclusion. We've built quite the interesting resource database, which has all been voluntary. And it's because of the passion. 3 entirely different teams of people that have dedicated their time. And now we're trying to get all that down on paper to create kind of train the trainer modules, because people are like, how do I do this? You know, how, and so really working with Autumn to go, okay, how do we do this? She looked at me and she goes, Tracey, get that down on paper. And I'm like, okay. So that's what we're working to do. And also I have to throw in the Academy, the American Academy for Park and Recreation Administrators is also in the mix with this, because, you know, there you've got some of the elite, I like to say, professionals in the country, and we hope they become trainers. And so I also chair the Academy Jedi Task Force, and they've heard about this, and it's like, how can we all? So what I love is that all of my associations, I'm just so proud. If I could have had 5 more slides, I asked Anne Marie, she wouldn't let me. NRPA, IPRA, and the Academy are really taking a leadership in, you know, being unselfish, but sharing in resources, and how can we do this together? And that's when it works. So I really had to create that synergy with you. And I want to end with, IPRA created the Champions of Change Award to acknowledge an agency who have exceeded goals, okay, as far as their efforts and what they're doing with diversity, equity, and inclusion. Last year, we were able to award the Skokie Park District in Illinois. We had 3 applications, all outstanding, but the Skokie Park District won the Champion of Change Award. And the next step that we're doing in our state is we hope to continue to have award recipients who could then, as agencies, mentor other agencies on how to progress through getting that process together to address diversity, equity, and inclusion in their communities. So there you go. I applaud the staff and all of the professional volunteers who have made safe zones and all of the work with diversity in Illinois possible.
Amazing, amazing work. And you know, it's a credit to you, Tracey, because I can hear your involvement here, and I can hear your willingness to get those conversations started. And you know, like Autumn said earlier, someone's got to start the conversation, and it may be uncomfortable, but you are out there doing it. And so kudos to you as well, and kudos to Illinois. All right, Sonya, take us home on this one.
All right, I'm going to wrap us up and be quick, but my 2 that I want to applaud today, of course, is our State Parks and Rec Association, North Carolina, being the past president. We really took on the challenge of how do we implement equity throughout our association. I shared with you earlier that we did that at the association level, looking at what our challenges were and how we could identify some strengths to work through those. In addition to the funding that we talked about earlier for the association itself allows individuals who've gone through the racial equity cohort training to come back and apply for grants to further equity work in their organization. So I think that's just an outstanding opportunity for equity work to continue. The association also partners with our NC BRAP, which is our North Carolina Black Recreation and Park Professionals Association, professionals group. And in that group, we are working with NCRPA to highlight the achievements and success successes of African Americans in Parks and Recreation North Carolina that have gone overlooked for years. So we love that partnership. There's a DEI committee that came out of the initiatives as well, and this is a statewide committee. We work together, and as a board for NCRPA, we adopted equity as one of our pillars alongside advocacy and professional development. So kudos to our staff there. Michelle Wells is our executive director. Daquan Edmonds, who's moved on to another position, is really the one who spearheaded this. And Matt Carasona also helped in that process as well. And now we have Justin, he's a part of the team. So we are really looking forward to the work continuing there. But I also want to applaud Asheville Parks and Rec for the work that they've been doing since 2011. They've been in the trenches for quite some time doing DEI work. And the retired director there, Roderick Simmons, good friend, great contact to have around equity in parks, and what they've done that's amazing to me is that they've been able to create equitable decision-making processes that determine how funds are allocated for parks and recreation investments. And I think that's one of the things we've talked about. What does that system look like for different communities? And they have a set of equity-based criteria that they use to prioritize how those capital investment and funds are distributed throughout their system. And not only that, they're going to hold everyone accountable. So they've got the performance metrics in place with detailed outcomes, the expectations, they've got timelines. And I am just excited to have Roderick and his team as a resource to use when we are all navigating this space. So I say kudos to Asheville Parks and Recreation as well as NCRPA.
That is fabulous. It's such exciting news. I'll tell you what, guys, this is absolutely crazy because we are out of time and we have never run this long, but there was no way I was stopping anybody from what they were talking about because this has just been the most incredible show that we have ever had.
My gosh.
I'll tell you what, we are going to have, I'm going to put the slide up here really quick for the next show. We do have another show coming up. But I want y'all to notice that QR code that's up there. You can scan that right now and take the survey for today's show. We are really excited to hear what you think and what you thought. And I personally think we need another show on this topic because
absolutely
the conversation needs to continue. I feel like we could have talked for another hour easily. So there is more work and more talk to be done here. If you feel the same, please let us know. Join us for our next show, which is going to be July 22nd. I'm sorry, that's not the right date. I'll get that to you. But you can go to playcorps.com/season 2 to register for that. We're calling it fall planning and programs. And I'll tell you, Tom and Pat and Joe have some amazing planning and programs that they are working on. So please go to season 2 to register. That show will be in August. You can see all the other dates for the show as well. And Jody, I am going to take it to you to take us out. And I'll tell you what, I'm just mind blown at the show today.
Oh my gosh. This was incredible. I tell you, our next show is August 12th. And can't wait to hear these colleagues because they are leaders in this, but they're going to really address a lot of things that you all brought up the last 2 surveys. So stay tuned. Okay. Now, panelists, we know we asked you to come on here, but come on. You knocked it out. Thank you so much. You're courageous. You are the sheroes of our field. And from the heart, thank you. Thank you.
So much comments. I wish you could all see the comments from Brandon and Stephanie and Mr. Whitmer. I just love the discussion. Thank you to the presenters. Well done. Kudos to all of you. Today's show has been incredibly resourceful, entertaining, and informative. Great job, everyone. We love you guys. Thank you so much. We could not do it without you.
The best.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, guys.
You bet. See
Thank
you all.
you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.